Hey you guys, welcome aboard and thanks for coming out for today's episode. And I think if you remember in our recent episode, SSL657, we had an interview with a sailing friend by the name of Fred Van Vogt. And Fred had the unfortunate experience to witness a runaway diesel firsthand on his sailboat, which of course burned and sank very, very quickly.
Burnt to the waterline.
But was your engine still racing at this point?
No, it went out on its own. So I don't know what happened down there to cause that.
Did it go out when you were still on the boat or after you disembarked?
Well, we were still on the boat, but now the smoke was thick and heavy. I thought, you couldn't go down in there unless you had a air mask on of some sort.
For those of you that missed that episode, I'll post a link in the description so you can go back and watch it because you want to see that one before you see today. Because in that episode, you guys asked a lot of questions and made a lot of very, very good points to which I've been doing a lot of investigating since. And we're going to deal with a lot of those comments today. Now, my subsequent investigations have led me to find an individual who works for a company that specializes pretty much exclusively in preventing runaway diesel engines. Perfect.
A diesel owner's nightmare. Runaway diesel. It's exactly how it sounds. A diesel engine that just won't stop, causing many problems such as damage or injury or even worse.
Now, this gentleman's name is Chase.Bailey, and he's coming here to talk to us today to help understand what causes this situation and what we can best do to help prevent it. So, give me 1 second, and we're going to try and get Chase on the line.
Hey Rick, how's it going?
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Chase.
Yes sir, how are you doing?
Good, I got your name right, it's Chase.Bailey?
Yes sir.
Okay, good, good. And the company, you pronounce the name AMOT?
AMOT, yep, AMOT Controls. We're out of Houston, Texas.
Okay, so Chase, tell me about the business that you are in. Is your specialty is diesel engines, obviously?
Yes sir, so for AMOT Controls, we've actually kind of got two parts to our business. And one half is a lot of your viewers may be aware of is our thermostatic control valve business.
Okay.
So we make three-way temperature control valves, and they're found on a lot of marine engine applications for lube oil cooling, jacket water cooling, charge air cooling.
Uh-huh.
So they're on a lot of larger vessels, those valves are. And then the second half of that business is the air intake shutoff valve business, which you and I have discussed already. And I think it was mentioned in your previous video, the valves that cut off the air intake to the engine.
Yeah, that's correct.
In the event of a
And
runaway scenario.
I was surprised how many viewers in that last video actually did mention it in the comments.
There was one specific comment about a rig saver.
Yeah.
That one of your viewers had said that's actually one of our product lines, is the rig saver valve.
And what is that exactly? Can you explain it to us?
Yeah, so basically this valve is the rig saver, and just like any of our other valves, they're installed on the air intake piping or hose.
Uh-huh.
In the event of a runaway, it detects runaway situation through RPMs or the alternator signal.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll trigger that valve to snap shut, and it'll close off the air going into the intake of the diesel engine and kind of choke out the engine.
Okay. Now, question for you. What are the options for taking that speed sense? Because if you have a tachometer hooked up to your alternator, let's say the engine starts racing, but the belt blows on the alternator, you won't have a signal from the tachometer for the device, right?
Right, so you can take the RPM signal off the flywheel as well.
Yeah.
With a magnetic pickup.
Okay.
So that's a part of our system. And then we also have manual pull cable systems as an option, which is not something we necessarily recommend, because the idea of, diesel engine safety, if there's a runaway, we don't want anyone getting close to that engine.
Well, exactly. Because, yeah, this is what everybody kept saying, and I've heard in the past, take a rag, stuff it in the air intake. But if that thing's racing and screaming, I don't know how close I want to get to that engine.
Right, because, and we hear that a lot, is we'll just choke it out, get a fire extinguisher. I think I saw another comment in the video.
Yeah.
And, try to clog up the intake, get a rag. I've heard a clipboard. People will put a clipboard right up to the intake.
Yeah.
And, close off the air that way, but definitely not the safest option to shut down a runaway engine.
No, and a lot of times in a diesel engine compartment, you don't have room for that kind of stuff to get in there with a big block of wood or a table, like a tablet or anything like that. So, yeah, I don't know. I think as backup solutions, yeah, you have to look at what you have. But what we're talking about with you is a device that could be retrofit to pretty much any engine aftermarket. Is that correct? Right.
We have, our air intake shutoff valve line goes from, 1 inch all the way up to 11 inch. We make valves that fit, every piece of equipment.
Now, how hard is it to retrofit it to an existing engine? Because obviously we have an air filter or a turbocharger, something like that. Is it something going to be applied to any engine, or?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We make, these hoses, adaptive hoses. So basically you can cut into your intake piping, place our valve in there, apply your adaptive hoses on either side, or, somewhat like a boot, and then it just pairs up right to that intake.
Okay. Now, you saw the video, the last video with the ship, with the sailboat, our friend's sailboat, when it burned?
Yes, sir, Captain Fred.
And you heard his description of how it occurred, like, it just kind of went out of control very rapidly, and then that was the end of it. He's in the dinghy. How does a diesel engine start to race out of control? What fuels it normally, if it's not from an outside source, or is it mostly from outside sources?
So, if you get on YouTube and type in diesel engine runaway, you can see all these different diesel engines and these overspeed scenarios where they're billowing out black smoke. And for the most part, a lot of those are caused by a leaky seal within a turbo.
Yeah.
So, you have oil running through the internals of your turbo, and then you have seals that keep that oil within there. If one of those seals fails, you now have oil into your intake.
Yeah.
And your engine can now run off of that oil because it can. Diesel engines don't have spark plugs. All they need is fuel and air.
Right.
and they'll operate.
Because yeah, my new engine is a turbo, but it's brand new. It's got about 300 hours on it so far. But of course that brings up the question, is that a concern with a new engine or primarily older engines, or what's your take on that?
Probably older engines would be more likely, just because the O-rings within that turbo more likely to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as it's being used, it gets lubricated, then maybe it gets dry rotted a little bit after sitting for a while. You know, it could be a number of things, but definitely older engines.
I also had a lot of people say, well, you should just cut the fuel lines. But in a lot of these situations, they're getting fuel through the air intake. Was cutting the fuel line going to do anything?
Right, cutting the fuel line, you know, won't solve the problem, because, you know, everybody's first reaction is typically just to turn off the ignition, which
Correct.
is cutting the fuel supply.
Right.
So you're getting fuel, like you said, from an external source. And so, like in our line of work, we see it a lot at refineries or upstream oil and gas sites. If there's a hydrocarbon in the air, you know, some kind of gas vapor leak, that is what the fuel source is coming from, and it's using that to combust, you know, within the cylinder. So cutting the fuel line, it will cut your own fuel coming in, but not the external fuel source. You'll have to cut the air off to successfully stop the engine from overspeeding.
And of course, if you got a bad seal, you've got an out of control leak, unregulated.
It's going to continue to run. Correct.
And if it's getting oil from the pan of the engine, that means it's just going to keep running until the oil runs out.
Right. And I believe it was either you or Captain Fred had mentioned, you know, it'll go until that oil just burns up.
Mm-hmm. At which point the engine just locks up because it seizes, because it's racing so fast with no oil.
Right.
Is that a typical occurrence, or it just stops burning and just stops?
Typically, you know, a runaway situation either ends until the engine seizes up and you have unrepairable damage, or it ignites that vapor, you know, air vapor mixture, as we saw in his, and it, you know, explodes.
But when they start a fire, is that just because the block gets so hot and it ignites something on the sides of the engine or in the compartment, or?
There's a couple, you know, reasons that a fire can start. One is that vapor in the air, you know, the external fuel source, those pistons are shooting so fast they can become unseated. Fire escapes like a backfire, and it can light that gaseous vapor in the atmosphere. Or number two, your engine is going so fast, RPMs are so high, and your turbo is going out of control. Your turbo can get so hot on the external side that it lights that vapor mixture.
You've seen some of the pictures of my engine? I can't remember. Did I send them to you?
I've looked through the engine spec sheet as well.
It's a brand new Beta 85 horsepower turbo. We're very happy with it. But yeah, my concern is that if something happened at sea, I would like to eliminate this possibility. Given what you know about my engine, what would it take to fix that, solve that problem?
If you look at your intake, you have that huge filter right before the turbo. So what we would do is post turbo, and is it have a charge air cooler on it? So does the air leaving the turbo go through a cooler, or does it go straight into the intake?
I'm not 100% sure, actually. I'd have to investigate.
Because what we would do there, typically on a turbo engine, you want to install our air intake shutoff valve post intercooler, because that just makes it a little easier on our valve. The temperatures aren't so extreme and so hot, so that it operates successfully. But we would put an air intake shutoff valve post turbo, so as close to the intake manifold as possible, and then set it up to read the engine RPMs. And
so,
then, you know, you would program.
You wouldn't have it. It wouldn't be between the turbo and the air filter. It'd be between the turbo and the engine.
Correct. Yes, that's the ideal placement. Just because if there is a runaway scenario, you don't want to completely choke off that air, because you kind of get some back pressure going into your turbo, and it could cause even more damage. You know, your turbo to essentially blow up itself.
So how hard is it, or feasible, to actually put something between the turbo and the air intake, the manifold?
Well, and like yours, you know, if that hose coming off the turbo, that would be a simple installation. Cut that hose, install our valve, put the adaptive hoses on either side, and set it up to where it reads the engine RPMs, and you'd be good to go.
But does the turbo have to be relocated, like mounted somewhere further away from its current position?
No, sir. No, sir. There looks to be enough room in the images I saw where you would have enough room to place the valve post turbo and not have to relocate the turbo.
And is this the type of installation that your average user can do, or you suggest, it's fairly mechanically intense, you should have a proper mechanic doing it, diesel mechanic, or what?
It's all up to, how comfortable you are with your own mechanical skills. I would say, a sailor like yourself who's familiar with the engine room, familiar with engines and themselves, you could get this done. But, if you're not comfortable, any diesel mechanic could definitely install our systems with ease.
And how many components are there to install? You got the speed sensor, the device itself, what else, and how much time are we looking at per component on average?
In a typical system, it'd be a mag pickup.
Mm-hmm.
It monitors the RPMs off the flywheel. You have what we call our rev guard, which basically takes the signal from the mag pickup. There's an overspeed, and that rev guard sends the signal to our valve to snap shut.
The flywheel's internal on the engine though, no? It's not exposed? So how do you mount this sensor?
Right, so you would drill a hole above the flywheel or near the flywheel and get it close enough to take that magnetic pickup read.
We need to get some advice from the manufacturer of the engine as to where to drill that hole, or is that something you already know?
It will be supplied within, our installation manual, depending on which valve is selected.
And what type of valve, like what size of valve, or what would I be looking at for my engine?
It depends on your intake sizing. So that hose, the black hose that's coming off your turbo, looks to be maybe 1.5, 2 inch. It's hard to tell from pictures, but it just depends on what size the intake piping is.
And the valve that you put in, now obviously if the engine's racing, that means there's going to be a very, very high amount of suction, correct?
Right.
Your valve is obviously designed that the butterfly valve is not going to just collapse or fold in half or something like that under the pressure.
Right. These things have been extensively tested. When they're snapping shut, they're snapping shut.
When we install it, is there any danger to testing it? Like by, if you put the engine up and you overspeed it on purpose to say 3,000 RPM and we have that set as the shut off, is there any danger in testing it where it just clamps shut and just kills the engine?
Right. We don't recommend testing it through, a runaway situation like that. It has a test mode where you don't have to get the engine up to 3,000 or 4,000 RPMs.
Mm-hmm.
A test mode can be done at 1,500 RPMs. Because
Okay.
it's real hard on the engine to get it up to a high RPM and then completely close off the intake air.
Yeah, so it's for emergency only
Right, correct. Yes, sir.
at those speeds. Because yeah, my normal engine RPM is about 2,000 cruising speed. But the maximum RPM is about 3,000, like 2,800. That's where the maximum horsepower rating is on the engine at 2,800 RPM. I'd probably set it very conservatively. Is that an option? You can set it where you want it, or is it
Yes,
pre-programmed by you guys?
We have systems that are programmable for the end user.
All right, because yeah, I'm taking a tach sensor off my alternator right now, so I suspect that would do the job. But yeah, my concern would be if it's over speeding, because I have very high output alternators as well. So if they put a stress load on the belt at that RPM, they might just snap, and then all of a sudden you would lose your speed sensor and it might not shut off. Would that be a truest possibility?
Yes, if the belt flies off the alternator, definitely a possibility.
Which means your device wouldn't trigger, is what I'm saying. So we want to look at something more permanent. So that would be the sensor that would be installed on the flywheel.
Right, RPM monitoring off that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now question, for my size of boat, like on average, the average sailboat that's going to be watching this video is probably in my size range, 45, 55 feet, something like that. Our engines are about 100 horsepower, so what's the cost involved approximately? Like, doesn't have to be exact, but just to give people an idea, what does it take to outfit or retrofit your current diesel engine with one of these systems?
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of system, if you're looking for fully automatic or, like the manual pull cable.
Yeah.
But I'd say a safe assumption anywhere from $500 to $1,000, somewhere around there.
And the automatic ones, that's where you're installing the read sensor.
Yes, sir. Correct.
and then that has an onboard integrated computer monitoring system or something that's just watching the RPM. And if the RPM starts to escalate, it's monitoring and it hits a threshold, it just closes the valve, correct?
Correct. And then we also have some with a toggle switch. So, if you don't want to go down there and do the manual pull cable, you can flip the toggle switch and it'll activate the valve to snap shut.
Okay, so it's kind of a combination between manual and automatic. It's still electrically activated, but you're manually activating a switch.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when an overspeed situation happens, does it usually escalate just very quickly, or sometimes it goes up slowly as the fuel source increases?
It's all depending on the situation. We've heard from, independent sources, 3 to 12 seconds is how fast an engine can run away. I mean, extremely quick.
Because, yeah, you remember in Fred's instance, he said that he just started to notice smoke downstairs, so he went back to the throttle and brought it up to neutral to bring it down. It came down in RPM, but as soon as it went into neutral, that's when it just started to race out of control. So I'm wondering, does that mean that it might have been already getting excess fuel while it was still in gear?
It very well could have. That could be, kind of like the oil leaks we were talking about earlier. Just an oil leak internally somewhere that was providing that fuel source.
Because, yeah, he said the engine had just been rebuilt a couple of years previous, but of course he hadn't used the boat in about a year and a half, so it hadn't had much testing since the rebuild. So I don't know if that would be a contributing factor, if there was just a bad seal or something not put together properly, or...
Unfortunately, there's no way of knowing, especially when you let something sit like that. Maybe one of those seals does get dry rot, and, that's what causes it to fail. There's no telling.
So you stock all the different sizes for pretty much every engine, or do you have to custom make them?
No, we stock for just about every diesel engine make and model and size. So, if there's a diesel engine out there on the water, probably got an air intake shutoff valve for it.
So if somebody watching is interested, they just have to get in touch with you, tell you what engine they've got, and you can tell them what you've got available.
Right, yeah, so you can just engine make and model, and then the intake sizing if you have it. And, we can outfit a system with that. So it's relatively cheap insurance and nice peace of mind if you're out there in the middle of the ocean.
No, and that's what I appreciate as well, because there's a lot of boats in here now that they can't even get insurance. After the major hurricanes, they just won't touch the boats anymore. So people are getting more self-insured by every year. You'd be surprised. And that makes them, when you don't have insurance, you don't have a backup, so it makes you much more cautious about what you do with your boat and how.
Right, absolutely.
And no, I think that's why we were looking at changing our engine and everything also. We just had it changed earlier this year. So same reason, we just want to, when we start new adventures, we got a family on board now, I want to make sure everything is as safe as possible. And that's where my concern came up about the engines. I don't worry about it being as a brand new engine so much, but still, I do realize that sometimes things happen, and even if a valve seal or something, like you said, a seal on the turbo, I've heard that more frequently, that sometimes the turbo can be the source of that problem.
Right, like I mentioned earlier, it's the oil going through there to cool the bearings of the turbine within that turbo.
Yeah.
And, a leak can happen at any time.
We like the turbos, they make the engines more efficient, of course, so that's why everybody likes them. But I want to make sure that we're protected against it at the same time, so... No, I'd like to discuss this further with you offline, so we'll discuss our engine in specific and see what it would take to get something made up for this one, and see if we can put something together, if that's okay for you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'd be happy to supply a valve for you, and hopefully you can make a little video installing it or getting it installed.
The only thing I'm unsure of is drilling the actual hole. I guess makes me nervous drilling holes through the cast iron of the engine, but I guess we got to do it, so...
Well, yeah, we can, like I said, we'll take a look at the application. Maybe that's not necessary for that specific application, but we'll definitely find a solution to get it fitted up and protected.
All right, well, no, that sounds very interesting, sir, and I can't thank you enough for coming out to speak with us today. It's very much appreciated, and I'm sure everybody appreciates knowing that there are some options at least, so I'd be surprised if you didn't hear from some of us, because I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on the channel. And, if anybody ever has any questions, you can reach out directly to me or visit amot.com. Reach out to us there.
Yeah, I'll put some links in the description so that anybody can follow and get in touch and get a quote or get some information, whatever they're looking for. So, No, that's perfect. So thank you so much for your time, Chase. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon in the very near future.
Sounds good.
All right, you have a good day, sir.
Yes, sir. You too. I appreciate it.
Thank you again. Bye for now.